Have you ever watched someone you care about walk away because you just couldn't show up the way they needed? And deep down, you weren't even sure why. So, if you live with ADHD or BPD, impaired empathy might be the missing piece behind why your relationships feel so unstable and uncertain. So we're going to break it down, dive into it, and here we go. What is impaired empathy? First of all, right? Now there's cognitive and emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is that you can relate to it in a very thought manner, meaning that you can cognitively conceptualize it, right? Thinking, you can understand it, you can recognize what it is. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Emotional empathy is like, oh man, I really feel for you in that situation. And you feel it, not overwhelmed feeling. And sometimes people with BPD, they do overfeel things. They do really over empathize with others, right? And there's this thought about, if empath or not an empath or overly emotionally connecting, and that's true. But when we're talking about emotional empathy, right, somebody's going through something and you really really feel it, and sometimes you feel it so intensely that it feels like it's happening to you, which can then distort your objectivity. So now what happens is the subjectivity gets into it and you're like, well, and you may over respond. Now, ADHD absolutely adversely impacts this, not all the time, but it can add to it. Let me explain how BPD and ADHD impact. The symptoms that make up ADHD include distractibility, impulsivity, trouble staying tuned into others' feelings. Whereas BPD, there's a sense of emotional overwhelm, black and white thinking, that's splitting, right? And projection. Projection is that you have feelings and you project it on to someone else. And you're not always aware that you're doing this because sometimes it's a defense mechanism. You're protecting yourself by projecting those emotions you feel like you can't deal with on to someone else. And because BPD does create a degree of distortion, that can be amplified. So you are responding emotionally to someone else, even though it's actually a feeling that you have that you are contending with. Let me give you an example here about impaired empathy, right? You might listen to your partner's frustration, but as soon as it's about you, your mind suddenly scrambles, right? Your brain goes in the blender and you're putting it on puree, man. And you either start defending yourself or shutting down. Not because you don't care, but because it's too much too fast. That adds to that emotional overwhelm component. Also, that distractibility. It's hard for you to focus, to tune in. You have trouble staying in the moment, and also that impulsivity takes you from one component to the next component to another component. So all of this is going on at once. So it just adds to this level of disparity and confusion. And if you have BPD, then of course you're going to turn it on yourself and amplify that BPD and family in the head. That just tends to make things worse. Now, impaired empathy leads to partner invalidation in some cases. Now, invalidation isn't always intentional. Often it's a byproduct of you going into survival mode. And in many ways, that it takes the emotional component out of it, meaning that you might approach it in an overly cognitive, like we talked about that cognitive empathy. You may approach it in an overly cognitive manner. So ADHD related interruptions, forgetfulness, or inattentiveness may be perceived as not caring. Your partner may be like, they don't even care. Maybe they're telling you about a really hard day, and then suddenly you're like, man, I can't believe that the New York Giants football team, right? I can't believe they picked up this in the draft. And your partner or this other person is like, what? I'm telling you about this at work. I might lose my job, whatever it is. And then they feel what? They feel invalidated. Now, BPD related invalidation. This is emotional reactivity that can shift focus away from your partner's pain to your own. So what happens is that you may always turn the focus onto your own feelings and needs, and that again leads to your partner feeling invalidated. And and I really want to give you an example to drive this home, right? So your partner says they feel alone, but all you hear is that you're failing again. That's that BPD, family in the head speak, that's telling you, well, I guess you're just a loser. Here you go. You're messing this up too. Because also in this example, we're going to continue with the example. So suddenly, right, you're defending yourself, crying or yelling, anything to escape that shame that BPD and family in the head is turning up on you. And now you feel more alone than ever. And both BPD and ADHD work together to amplify this. Now, each can work separately to create that validation as well as that internal sense of shame. So it's important to recognize, is it one? Is it the other? Is it both? And it's not really, I would say, like with a lot of my clients, we don't overly focus, oh, well, that's, this, that's that. Whatever it is, whatever the internal speak is, which is why I like family in the head, because it's not connected to just one disorder. All of us have family in the head, good, bad, adaptive, maladaptive, right? So what we want to do is we want to bring that insight to that, so that if you have that tendency that your partner expresses a concern or things don't feel right, you don't turn it on yourself and then talk only about yourself, which then invalidates your partner, because we don't want to do that. Not at all. And then what can happen outside of this is then it creates that shame-defensiveness loop. Been there, right? This is how feelings of inadequacy, which is common in individuals with BPD and ADHD, right? And not just when they're comorbid, meaning that they occur together, but it can also be if you only have ADHD or if you only have BPD. And only doesn't mean I'm minimizing it, just saying if they don't work together, right? You're with it, right? And what happens is that feelings of inadequacy can fuel this defensiveness. Defensiveness becomes a shield against perceived criticism. And what happens is when you add this shield, right, against perceived criticism, you can't really hear what's going on outside that shield. And that's important. And what happens is that it can come across as, and it can feel like a lack of empathy. And this is a manner or a process of self-preservation. You're trying to protect yourself. And I get that. But it's probably perceived by the other person as you being cold, as you being distant, as you refusing to connect with that person. Or it can be seen as you not caring and that you only care about yourself. And that can be really confusing. For example, right? You're not trying to win an argument that you and your partner or your sister or your brother or your neighbor or your parents, whatever, whoever, right? You're not trying to win an argument with them, right? You're just trying not to feel like a monster, like a horrible, evil, terrible person, but you're protecting yourself. So in protecting yourself, you push them away and they feel that push away from you, but they're interpreting it very much as defensiveness, that you don't care. They misinterpret it just like you may be misinterpreting some of your own feelings, emotions, needs, and impulse drives that distortion, that BPD lens that I talk about in my workbook, that distortion of seeing yourself, others, and the world around you. Now, BPD specific patterns such as splitting, right? Splitting, empathy overload, and projection. Now, BPD often involves overwhelming empathy that turns into distortion. We know that overwhelming empathy adds to that BPD lens that I was just talking about. And past invalidation, past abandonment experiences, past rejection, and if you've experienced, and if you have BPD traits or the full disorder or whatever it may be, you may have also experienced a sense of emptiness, hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness associated with difficulty connecting to your partners, right? Where you feel like you weren't seen, you weren't heard. A lot of people say, well, I just don't feel seen by my partner. And I think that's really important BPD tells you you'll never be fully seen because you don't want to show them all those parts of you. So instead, to manage it, you've been taught, right? And you've been taught by BPD family and head to split, which means that you see them as all great or all terrible, right? They're the angels or the demons, and there's nothing in between. And that creates the problem because you can't see the full person. For example, your partner says, I need more support. But what you hear is, you're too much, you're broken. And suddenly you're either begging them to stay or shutting them out completely. Have you had this experience? Have you felt like that? You're like, what? But because it's hard to listen to what your partner's actually saying when BPD, family in the head's amplifying the distortion. Absolutely, absolutely. So how do we repair the empathy gap? Well, you're going to have to add, and that's right, you're going to have to, because this is really important, what are called validation scripts. And this could be something like, I hear this is hard for you, and I want to understand better. You say that to the other person. You say that to your parents. You say that to your brother, sister, cousin, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whomever it is, right? I hear that this is hard for you, and I want to understand better. You have to teach yourself to slow down, check your interpretation, right? You know, the BC boys say, check yourself. So sometimes you got to check yourself. And it's okay to do a little BC boys and check yourself, right? And name that internal reaction. Put a name to it. When you name it, you can identify it easier. When you don't, it feels like this just nebulous, cloudy, uncertain thing that's floating all around, and you're like, whoa, my God, da, 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 da. Name it. And I know it's tough to do that. I encourage you to write it down. Write these things down. And that can be really, really helpful. For an example, right? When your partner says they're hurt, try pausing and saying, I feel the urge to defend myself, but I want to understand where you're coming from. That one pause can change everything. You could even take out the first part. I want to understand where you're coming from. Don't bring it back to you, because remember, sometimes that can be misconstrued as invalidation. So what we want to do is just focus, but you can mention the confusion. You can say, I'm not really sure where we are or what we're talking about. Wait, can you help me understand? And you don't have to understand everybody immediately from their perspective. You can't, I can't, and I've been a psychologist for over 20 years. Nobody can. And if somebody tells you they can, it might be time to move on. So bear that in mind. Now, what I want you to do is, right, I want you to recognize that empathy isn't about perfection. It's about being present, understanding that individual's experience. You got to remind yourself you're not broken. You've just been stuck in survival mode for too long. And ADHD amplifies it. BPD and ADHD working together against you amplifies it. And just BPD amplifies it. These are the three possible amplifiers: BPD alone, ADHD alone, or, I'm going to put it together, or, work with me, comorbid ADHD and BPD. And BPD and ADHD are comorbid. And I talk about it in my complex BPD book. So if you want to know more about it, as well as specific strategies, you can check out that book. That'd be really cool. So what I want you to do, if this hits home, if this resonates for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And this could be that partner. If you feel like, oh, how am I going to communicate all this to somebody? Then send them the video. Say, hey, can you check this out? And let's talk about it. Send it to your partner. Send it to your parents. Send it to somebody so they can see it. And comment below what helps you slow down and reconnect when emotions are running high and running hot. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.